And so we start with a question unanswered. What makes a film cinematic? Is it a matter of scope? Daunting vistas and loud spectacles shown off on triumphantly large screens? Or maybe it's striking cinematography, capturing recognisable faces within interesting places. In either regard, director Gus Van Sant is something of a tightrope artist, walking the wire between mainstream emotive populism and his uncompromising arthouse inclinations. For every Goodwill Hunting grasping for heartstrings and gold statues, there's My Private Idaho, pouring out in slow drips of obtuse tenderness. Van Sant makes human-sized films regarding universal subjects, and none are as cinematic in scale as death itself. Released consecutively in the early 2000s, Jerry, Elephant, and Last Days comprise Van Sant's Death Trilogy. Each of the 3 installments tugs at a different mortal coil: death at the hands of a friend, death at the hands of a stranger, and death at the hands of oneself. Beyond these thematic through lines, each shares a number of common elements. They're all loosely inspired by real events. Their pacing is unhurried and ponderous, guided by lengthy tracking shots bathed in natural light, all buoying extended sequences without dialogue. It's all far and away from the mainstream, which is a strange thing to say considering they're centred around our most unifying, inescapable truth. Even to hardened cinephiles, the Death Trilogy can be a clock-watching exercise in purposeful tedium. They communicate through quiet and move with uncomfortable serenity. I could throw around terms like hypnotic or glacial, but to be frank, a lot of folks will find these films insufferably boring. These are art films through and through. There's no sugaring the pill when it comes to an untimely end. Instead, Van Sant asks us to quietly choke down every moment of inaction and ambience leading up to the inevitable. They are not, nor do they intend to be, a beacon of entertainment. In each film, we see plot distilled to a single, profound arc. The slow, strange transition of a body from being alive to not being alive. This ephemeral fragility is most effectively captured by the series' middle chapter, Elephant. Inspired by Alan Clark's short feature of the same name, the title itself is flush with meaning. It's both a reference to the proverbial elephant in the room, a disruptive presence left unaddressed, and the parable of the 3 blind men and the elephant, where drawing conclusions without a full picture leads to futile speculation. While either interpretation plays to the broader discussion of school shootings in America, Elephant never succumbs to soapbox grandstanding or overt finger-pointing. With the gun debate as an eternally tangled mess of different sociological, political, psychological, and ethnographic arguments, what makes Elephant so compelling in its drifting horror is its firm footing in the personal rather than the statistical. Our plot here is skeletal at best. A seemingly ordinary day in the life of a small-town school, cut short by a mass shooting. The students wandering these serene halls, bustling fields and crowded cafeterias are, by their very design, generic. John is a self-reliant skate kid trying to juggle schoolwork and a troubled home life. Elias is the photo lab snap-happy art student. Nathan and Carrie are the jock and it girl romance. Michelle is the shy retiring dork who hides away in the library, and Brittany, Jordan and Nicole make up the prototypical gossip girl clique. Van Sant is using these cliches to jumpstart audience empathy with calculated economy. By populating the school with archetypes, it's a shorthand that eliminates the need for idle exposition or forced exchanges. We know these kids not by their actions or words, but by their positioning within the piece. Miraculously, this works to establish a deeper connection through seemingly shallow storytelling. Their vague characterization posits them as teenagers from our own life, be it our friends, our memories of high school, or our own children. Tropes can offer a potent reflection of reality, and to utilise them isn't inherently bad. By eschewing lavishly constructed backstories, or contrived incidental moments for the characters to react against, it keeps us focused on their ever-continuous, interconnecting lives. Only after everyone has been introduced innocuously drifting through their day-to-day, Do we meet the armed aggressors? It's telling that before we know them in any other context, we see Eric and Alex geared up and resolute in their commitment to chaos. Their motivations are merely alluded to in fragments of the film's jumbled chronology, rather than clear declarative statements. They're bullied by other students, ignored by teachers, beset with mental health issues, engaged with violent video games, unsupervised by parental figures, and exposed to troubling iconography. None of these factors are given any more weight than the other. They're merely observations without explicit comment. As we look on in horror at just how easy it is for these young men to procure guns online and have them delivered directly to their homes, the audience doesn't need to be nudged into dismay. With the cycle of blame, moral panic, and media scrutiny in the wake of such events, the focus is often taken away from the victims and the act itself and placed on trying to uncover instigating factors. Here, they're presented as a scrapbook of slights. No one is given any more stock than the other when trying to parse the motivations of these two troubled teenagers. As in real life, others face these same concerns without violent reciprocation. John has a turbulent home life, and Michelle is picked on and ostracised, neither of whom display outward hostility. This isn't a dissemination of agendas or ideologies, it's a series of matter-of-fact images of victims and violence, and the young men behind the trigger. It isn't fetishizing what occurs, nor is it exploiting its subject matter. Elephant toes this line visually, in part with its adoption of documentary conventions. Shot with a roaming, ethereal pace, it employs a technique Vivian Sobchak dubbed the accidental gaze. Sobchak describes this method as the least ethically suspect in its encounter with death. These moments aren't glorified or accentuated by the camera. They're observed with an anhedonic detachment, documenting the event for posterity, not titillation. By utilising the accidental gaze, naturalistic performances, and predominantly diegetic sound, manipulation is minimised. To use standard filmic modes of depicting death under these circumstances would be unnecessary and outright tasteless. It also serves to remove the cushion of these conventions for the audience, the preconceptions of what death looks and sounds like on film. While much of the audio design favours the noise of the world itself, half-mumbled dialogue, natural ambience, and reverberating gunshots, there are momentary exceptions. As we observe Alex playing Beethoven on his piano, it comes loaded with unspoken meaning. A potential rebuke of the tenuous arguments made that music can in any way incite violence, as well as a chilling contrast. Beauty born from the hands of a killer. None of the sparing uses of music throughout, either diegetic or non-diegetic, are in step with the contemporary setting. This lack of cultural touchstones keeps it untethered from a particular period of time, and always unfortunately relevant. One key sequence involving John, Elias, and Michelle plays out repeatedly from each of their perspectives. We're witnessing the symbiotic nature of human existence. Even when we don't communicate directly, we each have a part to play in the lives of those around us. It isn't a Rashomon effect intended for reinterpretation or scrutiny. The scene is always the same, just from a different angle. This is predestination. An inescapable march towards an all too inevitable end, no matter which way we look. Once the shooting begins, it recontextualizes the entire film up to this point. When we first met each of the students, their scenes played out slowly and without incident before cutting away jarringly. Here, we find ourselves picking up exactly where we left off, and with us, death is soon to follow.
Hey, you got...
What at first was their introduction is abruptly transformed into an epitaph. As the gunfire draws to a close, with many left dead, dying, or unaccounted for, the natural world fills the speakers with wildlife and wind. The final image of a crawling skyline flows overhead as the credits begin to roll, mirroring shots from the beginning of the film, as well as when the shooters had purchased their guns. In spite of all that's happened, in light of all this death, the world keeps turning without notice. Neither nature nor God are the cause of what happened here today, nor will they intercede in its abhorrent outcome. If I'm being entirely truthful, this is the only entry in the Death Trilogy I think holds up as an essential standalone work. While Jerry is mesmerising in its languid desperation, and Last Days is buried under the weight of its own pretense, both are more engaging as discussions after the fact than they are as artistic vision quests at the time of watching. Elephant finds substance and measured calm in a subject dominated by hyperbole and anguish. By lingering on the incidental mundaneities of life, Van Sant asks us to meditate on the meaning of death itself. Not as politicians, not as observers, but as human beings. Special shout out to Patreon producers Jennifer C and Just Paul, and as always a big thanks to the patrons for making this all happen. Thank you to everyone for supporting the channel and reaching out in the past few weeks. It's been really amazing to see, and long may it continue. If you'd like to join the In Frame Out Film Club or support the channel directly, please click the Patreon link in the description below. Until next time, this is In Frame Out.